Hello students, this is Professor Dominic and welcome to Elements of Art, and today we are going to be talking all about Chapter 1, What is Art? And this relates directly to your first assignment, which is to discuss what is art all about to you. When you look at the rubric for that assignment, there are some particular questions on it. I will talk about that in a separate recording that I will put out to all of you. In the meantime, I'm just going to talk a little bit about what art is. And this is from your book. We actually have a quote directly from the book, which says, "In both the sciences and the arts, we strive to weave our experiences into coherent bodies of knowledge and to communicate them." So basically what they're talking about is about how the arts and the sciences are related in some ways. In the sciences, scientists are looking at phenomena around them, natural phenomena, and trying to understand the world and explain it. And of course, they're using the scientific method, which is a bit more left brain than most artists are going to be going for. But in the arts, artists are also looking at the world around them and trying to understand it and trying to convey their thoughts about the world around them. So in that way, they can be kind of similar. So we're going to look at that. We're going to look at different reasons why people make art. Here we have a slide that talks a little bit about some things that you may already know, which is art enhances daily experiences. Art is often linked to quality of life. If you are starving and living in poverty and, worried about where your next meal is going to come from, you're probably not thinking about art very much. So quality of life, in order to have art, you need to have a fairly good quality of life, and art also enhances one's quality of life. Art touches everyone, whether you realize it or not, and in this course, hopefully, we will help you to see how it can touch you. And it is also all around us. As you're walking around Cheyney's campus, you may see art hanging on walls, which is a very typical place for art to be. You may see it in some of the offices that you walk into. There's also some very large sculptural pieces that are around on campus. So you're going to see art pretty much everywhere, and it is all around us. Also buildings. That is architecture, and somebody had to design those buildings. Most of the time, the architect is working on trying to make that aesthetically pleasing. So that is also a form of art. So again, art is all around us. There's no escaping it. So we're going to look at a few meanings of the word art itself. And whatever the definition, as it says in this slide, it is important to know the vocabulary of art in order to understand it. So today, one of the things I would like you to remember, if you don't remember anything else from today, remember, this is tied very closely to the name of this course, The Elements of Art. That's the name of the course. So Elements of Art is actually another way of saying the vocabulary of art, and the vocabulary of art helps us to talk about it. Art is very visual. It's often used to express things we cannot express with words. However, we need to have a way as human beings to talk about it and communicate to each other about it. So that is what all of this course is about. We're going to be teaching you how to talk about art. So a couple different things that might go into the meaning of the word art would be the word ability. So artists need to have generally some kind of ability, drawing ability, painting ability, and also the human capacity to make things of beauty and things that stir us. Also the idea of process. So the different forms of art, such as drawing, painting, sculpting, architecture, and photography, all of these things involve process. In drawing, it's usually as simple a process as taking a pencil and putting it on a paper, whereas with photography, if you're going old school especially, it's a lot more than that. You have film that you put in a camera, and then you take the picture, and then that film, if you're old school, had to be developed in a particular way, so you would need to have a negative, and then you would need to expose that negative to light, and you would have your finished product, which comes down to number 3, product, the completed work. So all of these things go into art. And another thing about art, truths about art, there is no agreed upon definition of art. Art does not necessarily have to be beautiful. You'll see that definitely here this semester. You're going to see a lot of things that are going to really stretch your mind. You're going to see a lot of things that you will think, well, how can that be art? That can't be art. So again, art does not necessarily have to be beautiful, and art can be created for any number of reasons. And also some philosophies about art. A lot of philosophers have arguments that art serves no function, that it exists for its own sake. And some philosophers have asserted that the essence of art transcends the human occupation with usefulness. And others have held that in trying to analyze art too closely, one loses sight of its beauty and wonderment, which I can definitely see that. You know, you want to just have that wonderful visual experience. Why try to interpret it until, it loses its meaning? So all of these things are true. There's kind of a lot of no rights and wrongs in this. So understanding and appreciating art, some things that can help you, especially if you're looking at a work of art that you hate, and it's going to happen. You will see things that you, not only do you hate, but you'll think, well, again, how is this art? Why can this be art? So questions to ask when you're confronted with things like that are, why was this created, and what is its purpose? And knowing the answers to those questions can help you a lot. They may not make you like the work of art, but they can at least help you understand it a little bit better and maybe appreciate at least where the artist might have been coming from. So here we have a slide. This again is right out of the textbook. So this class and your textbook is about the visual arts. And despite the visual arts' enigmatic nature, we're going to try to share something of what is known about them so that you can understand them. And I'm not going to try to force my aesthetic preferences on you, although I will definitely share with you what I like and don't like. I can't help it. Just as you will have things you like and don't like. And if in the end you dislike a work as much as you did in the beginning, it's completely acceptable. We will aim to create an awareness of what you respond to in a work of art, and again, learning the language of art in order to communicate why what an artist has done is important. So in this way, when you're talking about art, you can back up your argument. You can say, I hate it, but at least I understand it. So here we go. What are the purposes of art? So one of the things I do when I'm doing a face-to-face class is this is one of the very first things we do in class is I ask students what are the purposes of art, and then I write them up on a blackboard. So you guys are kind of getting the easy thing because we're just going to go right through what the book states about the purposes of art, but maybe you'll think of some others as we talk about it. So one of the purposes of art is to beautify the world. Art can add beauty to our lives by looking to nature. Artists are often imitating nature, and you see a lot of landscapes where an artist is trying to, render what they've seen around them in the natural world. And we also are going to look at how art depicts the Western concepts of beauty and the non-Western concepts of beauty. So when I say Western, I wonder how many of you know what I mean. If you don't know what I mean, you'll hear the term Western and non-Western in art history quite a lot. And Western generally refers back to Europe. We're going through the European traditions of the art of Greece and Rome, which in turn inspired the art of the Renaissance, and all of the art that you often find in art history books is influenced by all of these times, and that is considered Western. Non-Western includes the African continent. It includes Asia. If you think about it, non-Western actually in many ways is much larger than Western, but those dang Westerners, going out and colonizing the world and so forth, imposing their thoughts about what is beautiful on everything, you'd think that Europe was the very biggest continent, but of course it's not. So we're going to look at a Western concept and a non-Western concept of beauty. And also concepts of beauty are influenced by the age in which they appear. So what we find beautiful in the 21st century might not be what was thought of as beautiful in the 15th century, and vice versa. So beauty is in the eye of the beholder, whether that is in Western civilizations or non-Western civilizations. And again, this is because we are all influenced by the place and the time into which we were born. Can't help it. So here we have, on the left is the Mona Lisa, painted in the early 16th century by Leonardo da Vinci. It is considered a masterwork of the Renaissance, and she is also considered by many to be very beautiful, and certainly of her time she was very beautiful. And then on your right we have a photograph of a woman from Kenya of the Maasai tribe. So before I go into any more detail about either of these, just take a few moments and look at them and think about, are these beautiful? Is this something, which one is more beautiful than the other? Are they both beautiful? Is one of them not beautiful to you? And why is that? Okay, so hopefully you've looked at them, and you'll still keep looking at them as I talk about them. So a little bit about the Mona Lisa, and I'm going to talk about this a little bit because there's been so much talk through the centuries about this painting, and it is probably one of the best known paintings in art history. If it's not the most beautiful, it's certainly one of the best known. It's also one of the most reproduced, and as we go through the course, you'll see lots of other artists have taken the Mona Lisa and done their own versions of it. So if you look at her, you'll notice, by art standards of beauty, she's kind of plain, actually. She is a little bit fleshy, maybe, for Western tastes. She is, not skinny. She's also missing eyebrows, which in the Renaissance, it was not unusual for women to shave their eyebrows off. Sometimes they would even shave up into their hairline so that they would have higher foreheads, which is not something we do now. There's certainly a huge amount of emphasis on eyebrows these days and grooming your eyebrows. But in any case, also the other thing about the Mona Lisa is there's a lot of talk about, well, did she really exist? Or was Leonardo da Vinci painting himself as a woman? Well, that's a bunch of caca. Actually, the Mona Lisa was a real woman. She lived and died in Renaissance Italy. They know where her tomb is. And there's actually recently found, within, say, the past 5 years, they found a younger version of the Mona Lisa, so of the same woman. So Leonardo actually painted her twice. Part of why there's so much controversy and speculation about it is Leonardo, this was commissioned by Mona Lisa's husband. This is known as the Mona Lisa, but it's also known as La Gioconda because Gioconda was the last name of the woman and her husband who had commissioned Da Vinci to paint it, and Da Vinci never gave it to him, which is weird. He carried it around with him for the rest of his life wherever he went. So people found that to be kind of intriguing. But the fact is, Da Vinci was a difficult guy to work with. He often didn't complete his commissions, and he often did not deliver them to the people that needed them delivered to. So that's a little fact about Da Vinci. So on the right, we have our Kenyan woman. And interesting thing about the Maasai tribe, the young women shave their heads, which, you know, if you've been in Kenya, you know how hot it is. I think that is incredibly practical. What's interesting, though, is the young men, the young cattle herders, the young warriors, they let their hair grow very long. So the men have long hair, the women shave their heads. You'll also notice that she's got what looks like red clay rubbed on her face, and that is what that is. It's red ochre, and it's meant to highlight the beauty of her skin, the whiteness of her teeth, the way the beads are draped around her head and her face. They're meant to bring out her cheekbones and her eyes. And then all the necklaces that she's wearing, she most likely made those herself. A young woman shows her bride status as she's getting ready for her wedding by creating many necklaces, because beads are status and represent money in a lot of places in Africa. So the more necklaces you have on your wedding day that you're wearing, the better off you are. So she would be considered to be very desirable and very beautiful to the people around her. All right, so next I'm going to show you one of those things that's going to make you say, well, Professor Dominic, how can this possibly be art? And on the top left is a close-up of a painting that was done in the Renaissance by, oh shoot, what's his name? I'll keep talking. This is one of the Venuses by Sandro Botticelli, and this is often held up as another standard of beauty, kind of like what Michelangelo or Da Vinci was doing with the Mona Lisa. And what this shows is Venus was, you know, the goddess of love and beauty, and was considered to be the most beautiful. And so what you have on the right is a woman named Orlan. She's a French performance artist, and performance art is basically where the artist is not necessarily painting or drawing, but often is acting something out. It's very theatrical in a way, and in this case the woman Orlan is using her face as the canvas, and what she's doing there with the plastic surgeon marking outlines on her face to basically give her plastic surgery so that she will look like The Birth of Venus by Botticelli. So she was, by doing this, trying to make a statement about standards of Western beauty. And she's actually gone a little overboard. If you Google Orlan, you're going to find some very strange things where she has had much more plastic surgery done. She now kind of looks like an alien, and she did that on purpose. It wasn't like somebody gave her bad plastic surgery. She had like implants put in her forehead and stuff. So she's kind of taking her performance art to another level. So again, you'll see more stuff like that as we go through. So another thing, art enhances the environment. So art can be used to create pleasing environments. It is often used as decoration. It can be used to transport us to another place. So here we have, you might see this if you are a commuter and you travel through the city of Philadelphia on a regular basis. This is a mosaic, which is at Penn Center Suburban Station in Center City, Philadelphia. And it is a mosaic that was done by an artist named Joyce Kozloff. And if you don't know what a mosaic is, if you look closely at this slide, you will see that the artwork is made up by hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of little tiny tiles, colored tiles that are put together to assemble the work of art. and it's called Gala Placidia in Philadelphia. And what it's doing is it's showing William Penn, and in his hand he's holding the Penn Charter for the city of Philadelphia. And what it's also based on, it's called Gala Placidia because there was a 7th century emperor named Justinian, was married to a woman named, I thought it was Placidia, but it's not. But in any case, he had a mosaic done of her. So it's called Gala Placidia in Philadelphia as kind of a tribute to that, but it's got William Penn on it instead of the Emperor Justinian's wife. And so that enhances Penn Station. Another thing that artists will do, they often work with hotels and with airports and so forth to create interesting environments. So this is at the Bellagio Hotel in Las Vegas. And the artist Dale Chihuly, who we will see more of in the semester, is he's a glass artist. And what you're looking at is a beautiful ceiling that he did for the lobby of the Bellagio Hotel, where what you're looking at, they almost look like they're amoebas or something that you'd see sailing through the ocean. And what they are is hundreds of glass bowl-like things that he did. That's sort of his regular art, and he's had them suspended from the ceiling and then backlit so that it creates this very beautiful environment. The light is very soft and very warm, so it's meant to feel very comfortable. So art is very interesting in that it will often tell us the truth, although truth in art is subjective. Picasso is quoted as saying, "Art is a lie that leads us to the truth." And what does that mean? Well, it means that art often tries to imitate nature. So is it being truthful? But it can lead us to the truth. It can be true to human experience. Can it be true to the materials that the artist used to create the work of art? So we're going to look at two artists who did some biographical work. And on the left we have Frida Kahlo, and I'll probably talk a lot about her this semester. I'm a huge fan of Frida. And this slide, or this painting, is called Diego in My Thoughts. She painted this in 1949. It's oil on canvas. And she is basically, as you can see, she's got a man painted on her forehead. This is a self-portrait. Frida had a very difficult life. She had a horrible accident at the age of 19 that she suffered through. It was a horrible spinal injury for the rest of her life. She had many operations, and she was often by herself. So she wound up doing a lot of self-portraits because she started painting just to pass the time, and then, that became her thing. And she married another artist named Diego Rivera, and they had a very tempestuous relationship. Diego cheated on her repeatedly. She cheated on him, but he caused her a lot of pain, and he especially caused her a lot of pain when he slept with her sister. That was kind of like above and beyond, the worst thing. So Diego in My Thoughts shows him on her forehead. He is heavily on her mind, and you can see tears coming out of her eyes. She's telling some very difficult truths there. Then on the right, we have a photograph, a black and white photograph by the artist Robert Mapplethorpe. It's a self-portrait from 1988. And he was probably wearing a black turtleneck in the photograph with a black backdrop, so all you see is sort of his head looking as though it's sort of floating, and his hand holding a cane, and what's at the top of the cane? A skeleton or a skull. And so when we see skulls, what do we often think of? We often think of death. And so with that, this was actually done. It was a photograph that he took of himself not long before his own death. Robert Mapplethorpe was gay, and he was an active artist at a time when AIDS had really just been discovered, and there's still no cure for it, but now, they have a drug cocktail that allows people to live for quite a long time with it, and they hadn't discovered that then. So he knew that he was on borrowed time and that he was probably dying at the time. So it reveals a truth about himself there. So speaking truths, artists use it to speak truths about themselves and also about the world around them. And so in this piece, this is a portrait of a family. This was done by a Chinese artist, Zhang Xiaogang. I'm not Chinese, so I hope I said that correctly. And what you basically see is this interesting passage of red in the little boy there in the front, and the black and white of the parents. And he's making a commentary about the Chinese communist culture of this time that he grew up in. This is from 2003, but basically what was happening in China for a very long time is communism did away with a lot of traditional things that we think of in Chinese culture, which, a lot of the beauty and color and so forth, and everything became very drab. And so his parents there in the portrait, I'm assuming they're his parents, are dressed in very drab outfits, almost like communist uniform outfits. And then the other thing that's interesting is it's called Big Family, and well, there's one child. Why is it called that? Well, in contemporary Chinese life at one point, and I think this is still the case in China, you were only allowed to have one child. And in fact, if you have more than one child, you are penalized in some way. And a lot of times, children that are not male would be aborted because male children were more desirable. So you have a boy there. So there's sexism there. There's a real sadness there. And what began happening in China was that they had a surplus of males, for one thing. And with the one-child policy, because they were overpopulated, what wound up happening is they have an abundance of people who are seniors who need taking care of and not enough young people to take care of them. So the artist is making several different types of statements with this work of art here. So that is him telling the truth about the culture in which he grew up. Another thing that art can oh, here we go. This is just kind of saying, again, it shows reality, or it can express an artist's own experiences, and we will see that over and over and over again. So another thing art does is art can immortalize the artist, for one thing. I mean, people like Leonardo da Vinci, we know that name hundreds of years after his death. Also, that painting, Mona Lisa, she's been dead for 500 years, but we still know who she is. Art can also bring people together, quote unquote, from different periods of time. So let's look at some examples. So this is a very, very famous work of art. You guys have probably seen this before. This is Andy Warhol's Four Marilyns, and this is just one of his works of art that he did of Marilyn Monroe. And what he would do is he would take photographs and print them over and over again and use silkscreen to create different colors on the same black and white photograph. In this one, he's kind of staying the same, but that repetition, and he loved celebrities. He did this with a lot of celebrities. It was really a thing for him. And what he does with this is, well, we can say he is immortalizing Marilyn Monroe. And then this also is another kind of tribute. This is Judy Chicago's Dinner Party, which she did with a number of different artists. This was a collaborative piece where she came up with the concept, and then she worked with ceramicists to create the plates. She worked with metalsmiths to create the silverware and the glasses. She worked with embroiderers and textile artists to create the tablecloth, and what she did is she's creating a dinner party for women throughout history. So also all of her collaborators on this were also women, and what she was doing was trying to emphasize the importance of women throughout history. And if you look at the photograph on the right there, you will see written on the tablecloth are the names of women. Each place setting represents a different woman and the work that she did, so the colors and the imagery there will have something to do with that woman. And then all those signatures in the center are of all the different women throughout history. Art and glory. As I said, art can immortalize people and events throughout the ages. And art history's wealthiest patrons, often government people, politicians, emperors, kings, so forth, commissioned artists to create works that glorified their reigns and their accomplishments. So here we have the column of Trajan. He was the Emperor Trajan, who ruled Rome. This was dedicated in 112 AD. It is 128 feet high. It sits in Rome. And what you see, you can see lots of series of images sort of spiraling up around that column, and those basically are telling the story of Trajan's exploits and the places that he conquered, and woohoo, how powerful he was. And it still stands today. You know, the Roman Empire is long gone, but the column of Trajan still stands, as do a number of other things from other Roman emperors' rules. This is also something that you might have seen. These are the terracotta Chinese warriors. This is from the Han Dynasty, and these were created by the first Emperor Qin, which, by the way, Qin is spelled Qin, but it's pronounced Qin, and it's from his name that we get the word China. And this is one of those cases where these were discovered accidentally. I believe that they were found possibly by a farmer who was, digging, and oops, I found this huge thing, and this goes on and on forever. It's his tomb. And basically what the Emperor Qin did when he died is he had this ginormous tomb built. Each one of these warriors, they're in terracotta, represents an individual rather than burying his entire court alive with him, which, some guys did that, but he did not. Instead, he has these replicas done. Each one of these, there's hundreds of them, represents a distinct individual. Each one is a little bit different, and they were meant to look after him in the afterlife. And so this goes on and on underground for a very long way. They're still excavating it, but the whole idea was to recreate in the afterlife the emperor's lavish palace. So you might imagine what it would have taken to create, the number of people that would have had to work on this. To create this. So, the emperor has a lot of ego, he has a lot of ambition, and a lot of wealth. Art and religion. If you've ever been in a Catholic church, you've seen lots of statues, you've probably seen lots of representatives or representations of the Virgin Mary. If any church, a lot of churches will have stained glass windows that will have scenes from the life of Christ. So art and religion is where the quest of immortality kind of goes into finding answers for the unanswerable and trying to express our feelings about the divine. And lots of people from many different cultures for many, many centuries since the beginning of time have been trying to ask these questions about the divine. So art and religion is used to express hopes for fertility, especially ancient art. Seems like almost all ancient art we look at has something to do with fertility, whether it's I want to have a lot of children to I need my crops to be fertile. Also to propitiate the gods. In ancient times, lots of people were polytheistic, meaning they worshipped many gods. So we have lots of art that has something to do with those from many different cultures. Also to symbolize great religious events and values, and to try to commend heavenward the souls of the departed. So the book asks, can you think of any others? And I'm sure you can. All right, so here we have, this is something that comes to us from Native American culture. This is the North Wind Mask, also known as Negakfok. And this is a part of a series of masks that come from the Yupik-speaking people who are Inuits in western Alaska. And this would have been worn during rituals that were meant to mediate the spirit world, and in this particular case, the winds of the directions, the north, south, east, west winds, and also in between the human worlds and the animal worlds. So there would be dancers who would be wearing these kinds of masks. And the mask, you know, if you've taken African art with me, you know that the mask does not end with just the mask. There's a whole costume that goes with it too. So there'd be a mask, there'd be a costume, there would be dance, there would be music, and the people who were dancing the masks would be transformed into the spirits of the wind. So the spirit of the north is associated, not surprisingly, with snowstorms and very cold temperatures. And then there's also white spots that are painted on this mask. They may have to do with snowflakes, and the sound that is created by the wood pieces that clank together is meant to be reminiscent of the whooshing of the winds. And then we're also looking here, we have another artist, another Native American artist, Jesse Unark, and this is called A Shaman's Helping Spirits. And basically this is, if you know anything about shamanism, if you don't, a shaman is a person in an indigenous culture. Every indigenous culture has some form of shamanism. Originally the word meant something very particular, having to do with Siberian religions in Russia, but it's come to mean in indigenous religions a priest of nature who uses natural forces and animals to help him communicate with the spirit world and to do healing and things like that. So here you can see an image of a man with all of these animals inside of him and on him that would be his helping spirits. And then to the right, we have something that might be perhaps a little bit more recognizable to a lot of people, Noah's Ark. And this was painted by the African-American artist Aaron Douglas. And this was done for a series of paintings that were in a book called God's Trombones by James Weldon Johnson. He wrote the Black National Anthem, so you may know him from that, Lift Every Voice and Sing. And in this particular piece, Douglas is doing a version of the Great Flood where Noah is black and the people represented there are African. And it shows Noah, you know, basically gathering all the animals 2 by 2 onto his ark. And a lot of the biblical pieces that Douglas did, he is working in a style that is bringing African American people into the art historical discussion. And then here's something that's very interesting. This is a miniature piece. It's very small. It's only 12¼ inches by 8 1/16 inches. And what you see in the background was probably painted with gold leaf, so real gold. And this is called The Prophets Muhammad and Moses with the Angel Gabriel. And you can see on it, it's written in Arabic. And it's showing us, it's a very beautiful piece that's showing us a narrative of significance in the life of the Prophet Muhammad. And it's showing Muhammad where he's led through 7 heavens by the angel Gabriel. And in this particular part of the journey, he is meeting Moses and he is asking Muhammad about his prayer obligations to God. And if you're Muslim, you might be familiar with this idea. This is a very unusual piece because in Islam, you're not allowed to show images or the faces of Muhammad or anybody. You're not supposed to show humans. But what's interesting, this piece was painted very early on. This is around the 5th or 6th century AD. And in both Judaism has a similar tradition as well. So you see in certain times, early times, that you might see some faces, human faces. So that makes it kind of very unusual. And of course, Muslims believe that Abraham was the first prophet and that Jesus was also a prophet, and Muhammad was the last prophet, completing God's revelation. And then this building here is one of my most favorite works of architecture in the whole world. What you're looking at is the interior of a church called the Hagia Sophia. Hagia Sophia in Greek means holy wisdom, and this originally, it's in what today is known as Istanbul. It says Constantinople on the slide, but today it's known as Istanbul. This was built in the 6th century by the Emperor Justinian as a Christian church. And if you look carefully at the slide, you can see on some of the walls are painted what look like angels. And then you'll also see Arabic calligraphy there as well. And what is so fascinating about this building is that it was originally a Christian church, as I said, and then when the Ottoman Turks came into Turkey in the 16th century, it became converted to a mosque. And so if you see pictures of this building from the outside, if you watch the movie Taken 2, I think, yeah, Taken 2, you will see they're like running around inside the Hagia Sophia. But one of the additions that they made as when they made it a mosque is there are 4 minarets on the outside. But what I love about it today is it is a museum for people to come and look, and it reflects both religions, both the Christian religion and the Muslim religion. So, art and ideology. Art is often used to create and reinforce ideology. So ideology is the way a society looks at things or a society's commonly held beliefs. And so it's often used, art, it might be used, as we saw just now, by people who are religious, and we'll look at some of that. It's also used a lot by people who are political. Art is used as propaganda as well. But we're going to look at some religious examples. So this is a painting that was done in the Renaissance. This is by the artist Masaccio, and this is showing a scene from the Bible, the expulsion from the Garden of Eden, where Adam and Eve have tasted the apple of good and evil, and so they're being driven out by an angel who is holding a sword, and now they have knowledge that they are naked. So Eve is, being modest and covering her breasts and her lady bits with her hands, and Adam is just so ashamed that he's just holding his head in his hands and weeping. So it's basically showing, also trying to convey the idea that Eve, and by extension women in general, were responsible for humanity's fall from grace and loss of paradise. And for hundreds of years, this has been perpetuated as a negative view of women, and women have had to suffer for that. So what we also see, some of the Renaissance symbolism here, because Adam is holding his head, it's showing us that his decision to succumb to temptation was a sin of the mind, whereas Eve's is a sin of the flesh, bad women, naughty women. So we have another artist who's subverting this view, a female artist. This is by Susan Valadon. Very interesting artist. She hung out with a lot of the great artists of her era. She was a model for a lot of these artists, and during her lifetime she really was not celebrated as much. So that's part of what makes this painting so interesting. It's called Adam and Eve, and what you have here is it looks as though Adam, if you can see, he's leading her hand to the apple. So also his body parts, not Eve's, are being covered by vine. So he, in this case, is the one who is shameful. So Suzanne Valadon is trying to give us a different look at this old story. All right, art and fantasy. So what's interesting about this, sometimes fantasy is really beautiful and fun, and can, as it says here, art can express our innermost fantasies, can also express our worst nightmares. And many 20th century artists looked to the psychoanalytic writings of Sigmund Freud and Carl Jung, and they suggested that primeval forces are at work in the unconscious reaches of the mind. And so a lot of artists were trying to find those unconscious reaches and figure out, you know, what was making us do the things that we do. And artists sought to use their art as an outlet for these unconscious forces. So we're going to look at some early 20th century artists. On the left, we have work by Marc Chagall called I and the Village. On the right is The Dream by Max Beckmann. So I want you to just take a look at these for just a moment. And when you look, which one to you looks a little bit more pleasant? Which one looks less pleasant? Or maybe they both look unpleasant to you, I don't know, but I'm just asking you to think about that for a moment, because I think the one on the left looks a bit more pleasant. The Dream on the right kind of looks like a nightmare. It's very crowded. People are falling in on each other. There's a lot of confusing stuff going on. There's musical instruments. There's some people that look like they're trying to climb up or climb out. There's a guy holding a fish. What the heck is going on? It's very chaotic. Whereas on the left, I and the Village, I'm going to talk a little bit about the context of each of these. Now, we're going to talk about context more in Chapter 4. But context, excuse me, is the when, where, and what, and how surrounding the painting. So for Marc Chagall, the context is he was a Russian Jew. He was a Russian Jew who grew up in a village in Russia. He came to America because he fled World War II, basically. But what a lot of his paintings show is this sort of Russian Jewish folklore. So in the center of the painting, you see like a tree coming up, kind of like the Tree of Life, which is known part of the Kabbalah, which is part of Jewish mysticism. And then you've got a man's face and kind of a goat's face, or a sheep, a goat or a sheep, not sure which. You've got a woman milking a cow. It's a bit surrealist, you know, it's a little bit dreamlike and, you know, topsy-turvy, but it just all kind of reminds you of like what small village life might have been like in Russia at the beginning of the 20th century. And then on the right, The Dream, Max Beckmann. This was done in 1921. This was after World War I. And what's very interesting is Germany in World War I, after World War I, was a decimated place. The Germans lost World War I. They did not do well, and they were severely punished by the rest of Europe, which is part of what led to the rise of Hitler and then eventually led to World War II. So, you know, you might expect that a person living during those times is feeling chaotic, is feeling isolated, even if surrounded by a crowd. So it might have been a very nightmarish time to live in. So next thing that art does, you might know, is that it makes you think. It can make you feel. It can make you find associations between things. So this next part is art, intellect, and emotion. So we're going to look at what is known as conceptual art. And this is art. One of the things I will say too about conceptual art is showing a beautifully painted picture with the artist's technique, showing, wow, I'm really good at painting all these details or sculpting all these details. Not important. What is most important with conceptual art is the idea that the artist is trying to convey. So as it says here, conceptual art does not represent external objects. It also challenges the traditional view of the artist as creative visionary, skilled craftsperson, and master of one's media. The art lies in the artist's concept. Again, conceptual art. So let's look at some. It's meant to make you think. So conceptual artists might often use something known as word works, which is basically, a lot of times they will, they do all kinds of things. Sometimes it's very beautiful poetry that you might see written on a wall. Other times it's commentary, as it says here, on the impersonal systems of modern times, while posing a challenge to the formal premises of art and stirring intellectual responses in the viewer. And so this piece here is by Jenny Holzer, who does an awful lot of word works. And this she did in the Guggenheim Museum, which, if you've ever seen the Guggenheim, it is a circular building, and then on the inside the floors look exactly like what you're seeing here. They've got these sort of balconies wrapping around, and so she took neon lights, and you can read some of what it says there. So it's called Truism: Inflammatory Essays, the Living series, He Living series, the Survival series, and again they're sort of inflammatory. The first one says, private property created crime. What does that mean? Think about that. Next one says, push yourself to the limit as often as possible. And then the bottom one is random mating is good for debunking sex myths. Okay, that's weird. So, yeah. So, again, meant to make you think. Not necessarily meant to answer questions, but to just kind of disturb your mind a bit. And then this is a piece by Barbara Kruger, who is another word artist, and we will see more from her. And this is called Money Makes Money, and a rich man's jokes are always funny, and you want it, you need it, you buy it, you forget it. So think about, well, what's she trying to say? All right, so those were a little bit non-harmonious. We're going to talk for a moment about art, order, and harmony. George Seurat, painter of the 19th century, said art is harmony. Jean-Francois Millet, also of the 18th century, early 20th, said, I try not to have things look as if chance had brought them together, but as if they had a necessary bond between them. So in this particular section, art creates order. Art creates harmony. And artists often try to find the underlying order of nature, which can be very peaceful. And then we're going to look at a work, I guess you could call it a work of art. I don't know if the people who created it think of it that way, but it reflects the tenets of Zen Buddhism. And Zen Buddhism is a Buddhist sect that seeks inner harmony through introspection and meditation. So on the left is a Japanese sand garden or rock garden, and you can see there's some very large rocks, and then they're surrounded by teeny little pebbles, and you can see these have like nice little furrows in them. And basically what a Japanese rock garden has is it looks like this, and there's a very wide spaced rake that you can then take into the garden with you, and create your own designs and patterns in the rocks. And it is meant to create a sense of calm in you doing that. It's meant to be meditative and calming. So I think that would be a pretty cool idea. And of course, it always changes by people going in and doing things to it. And then on the right, we have the idea of order actually posing a threat to your harmony and your psychological well-being. So this is called Red Library Number 2 by Laurie Simmons. And what it is, it's a photograph, but it's also an installation, because in order to create the photograph, Laurie had to go in and actually create this whole situation and then take pictures of it. So nothing is out of place here. Everything is exactly where it belongs. And you have a robot-like woman assessing, a job well done of putting everything together. And she's actually even become one with the task, even in her dress, her hair, and her skin color. So in this particular case, order is meant to be kind of disturbing. So now we're going to look at 2 paintings by the same name, and this is something that we'll be doing throughout the semester. We're going to stop and compare and contrast some things. So this is the Piano Lessons by the artist Henri Matisse and Romare Bearden. 2 paintings, same name, different artists, different ideas. So take a moment. On the left, we have Henri Matisse's Piano Lesson from 1916. And on the right, we have Romare Bearden's Piano Lesson from 1983, painted by 2 very different people in 2 very different times. So take a moment and just take a look and see what you notice about them. And I'm just going to ask you some questions, and it's up to you to think about how to answer them. So the guy on the left, obviously it looks like it's that little guy with the triangle on his face. Does he look as though he might be enjoying that piano lesson? Is the space that he's in actually a happy space? What's going on all around him? For those of you who know music, that little triangular thing sitting on the piano itself is a metronome. I know when I was taking music lessons as a kid, I dreaded the metronome. There's a metronome on the right, too. It's red. Take a look at that. But what's the difference between these 2? Do the colors in one feel more happy and more comfortable than the other? Does one of these piano students seem more supported than the other? Yeah, so just think about that. So this just kind of gives you an idea of how different artists can take the same concept and have very different evaluations of it. So as art can also bring order and harmony, sometimes artists will use art to show chaos, apocalyptic events, war, famine, and natural catastrophes. So this is a work by Jean Quick-to-See Smith called Eclipse. And Jean Quick-to-See Smith is another Native American artist. And this really doesn't have any actual reference to nature. Maybe there's what looks like it could be representing suns and moons there, but really no real reference to nature or reality. Instead, there's this atmosphere of a lot of color, agitated lines, and so forth. And the artist in question grew up on the Flathead Indian Reservation in Montana and is basically using a lot of different Native American geometric motifs and images to kind of convey the chaos that an eclipse might have made early people feel. Oh, where's the sun? Oh, will our crops survive? Are we going to be okay? Next thing, art, experience, and memory. So art also records and communicates experiences and events. and also conveys the personal experience of an artist. So this is Louisa Chase's Storm from 1981. This is oil on canvas. It's huge. It's 90 inches by 120 inches, so it's very, very big. And what she's doing is she's kind of abstractly showing us some waves, waterfalls, thunderstorms, and so forth. There's a cluster of thick black clouds in the background which are shooting out rain. And then there's also this very decorative, gentle palette of pinks and purples, and the rain is very artificial blue. And then it shows a fern kind of weirdly springing up there, which is nourished by the downpour. Beneath the sprig, we have a little hand, if you can see that little tiny hand, and it's actually cupping the raindrops. So it's part of the painting and part of the nature event as well. And Chase said of a similar storm painting, during the marking process, I do become the storm, lost yet not lost. An amazing feeling of losing myself yet remaining totally conscious. And then here we have, and I'm going to have two works of art, two very different works of art, showing two very different experiences. And as we'll see in the coming semester, photography, of course, has been used since its inception to record events. But it does more than that. It is an art form as well, and we'll talk about that more as we go on. And one of the people who really promoted photography as an art form is Alfred Stieglitz, who is the artist who created this photograph here. It's called The Steerage, and he took this in 1907, and this was on basically a very large ship called the Kaiser Wilhelm II. And basically what it's showing us, you see there's a bridge, and on top, the top balcony, are all the upper class people who had the money for good tickets and to have decent cabins. You can see a lot of the men are wearing hats. They're wearing ties. Their clothes are a little bit more expensive. And then the steerage is down below. And the steerage was the part of a ship that was the least expensive. So here we have people who maybe are trying to cross the Atlantic in hope of a better life. You can see there's laundry hanging, there's women carrying their children. It has a very different feeling. So basically showing immigrants entering New York Harbor and different experience of different people entering the United States. And then next we have Tar Beach. You might remember, if you were lucky, you might have had the book Tar Beach by the artist Faith Ringgold. And what it is, the book is a collection of art quilts that she made about her childhood in Brooklyn. And this is from 1988. And it's showing her family eating dinner on the roof of their house in Brooklyn. And also basically documenting her memories of her family, her friends, while growing up in Harlem. And what you can also see is she and her brother laying on a blanket. And what that's meant to show is they called it Tar Beach. They would pretend that they were on a beach. And so that's part of her fond memories of her childhood. And then if you look up into the background of the painting above the buildings, she's flying through the sky, because they would also pretend that their blanket was a flying carpet and that could take them on fantastic journeys. So it's a beautiful little piece of remembrance and also some fantasy there as well. Another thing that art does is it provides us with social and cultural context. You can get a distinct feeling of a moment and place and time. Art also tells us what fashions were at a distinct place and time in history. So this is Edward Hopper's Nighthawks, very famous painting. It's oil on canvas. I want you to take a look at it for a moment. What kind of building are we looking at here? Nighthawks, kind of obvious why that is. You can see in the diner sort of thing that they're sitting in that there's coffee urns up on the counter. There's a guy actually wearing a uniform. This was a place and time where late at night a man would still wear a suit and a hat, and a woman would have her hair and makeup done and be wearing a nice dress. So when do you think this was painted? I purposely did not put the year on this painting. So take a moment and think about it. What does this make you feel like? And if you're not sure, I'm going to tell you, this was painted in 1942. So if you watch films from this time, you will see this sort of, this sort of place that people would go and people wearing these kinds of clothes. So similar yet different. Is this piece. We'll go back here for a moment. So in recording experiences, artists frequently record the activities and the objects of their times and places, as we can see, contemporary fashion and beliefs of their time, the crafts and sciences, and also architecture, which architecture has a lot to do with the materials that are available, with the technology that is available at the time. So we'll get to that in a second, but first, we're going to come back to this. A lot of my students crack up when they see this piece, and it is kind of funny. This is by a British artist, actually, Richard Hamilton, and the name of this piece, it's a collage, as you can obviously see. It's called Just What Is It That Makes Today's Home So Different, So Appealing? And that's actually the type of article that you might find in a magazine from the late 1950s. This was a period of time when things were being automated, where women were starting to use vacuum cleaners, where a lot of food was being sort of pre-packaged, so it was easier to cook for women. So if you look carefully at this piece, you'll see our bodybuilder holding a Tootsie Pop, and then down at his feet is a tape player. My parents had one of those. Maybe your grandparents do. You have a pinup model sitting on the couch, kind of proffering up her boobs there, with a lampshade on her head. Yeah, not unusual. And then on the coffee table, there is a prepackaged ham, which, would be very easy to cook. So easy cooking. And then on the stairs behind our bodybuilder is a woman with a vacuum cleaner, which was a new thing at that time to, make modern life so much easier, so much, as it says, so appealing. My mother used to talk about things like that, that they were such a thrill to have because it made your life so much easier. So next slide is, this is actually a recreation. This is a bridge that exists now, but this was the design for it. This is the Sheikh Zayed Bridge, which connects Abu Dhabi Island to the mainland. And what's very interesting about this, it was designed by Zaha Hadid, and what you can see is actually an Arabic influence in the swoop and grace of the structure holding up the bridge, because it feels like Arabic calligraphy. So she is kind of expressing her culture through that. So art also has to do with social consciousness. artists through the centuries have used art to express revolution and revolutionary ideas. So this is a piece, if you saw Les Miserables, this may have some meaning for you. This is by the artist Eugene Delacroix. This is Liberty Leading the People. This was painted in 1830, oil on canvas. And this is very French. What it's showing is liberty is personified as a woman. And if you think about our own Statue of Liberty, the Statue of Liberty was actually a gift to the United States from the people of France. So there's that. And Liberty there is holding up the French flag. And you might ask yourself, why is she bare-breasted? What the heck is going on there? Well, that can show a couple of things. She's come out of the struggle. Liberty and the little boy that is with her, who's holding a pistol in each hand, are emerging from smoke and chaos. And she is, they're about to step over bodies. So she is liberated in that, her breasts are free, and she's come through quite a lot. So that might also represent the falling away of a number of things, the falling away of her dress. The child, of course, represents hope and youth, and she is leading the people. And in the context that this painting comes out of is the French Revolution, and France had a revolution number of years after the United States had theirs. France kind of went through several revolutions. They had a very strict monarchy over them that overtaxed the people and taxed them into poverty. So when the people rose up against the government, it was a very dramatic, bloody thing. So kind of interesting. So that is expressing that mood of that time. So artists have taken on bitter struggles against the injustices of their times and have tried to persuade others to join them in their causes by using their art skills. And actually, at the time that I was pulling this together, I didn't have time to pull it out, but I will hopefully show you later in the semester, in the wake of things like the shooting of Trayvon Martin and the death of Sarah Bland and Black Lives Matter, that there's a number of African American artists and artists of other races as well who are taking on that theme and using art to promote the movement of Black Lives Matters. This is from some earlier times, the earlier civil rights movement, and also the feminist art movement. We have on the left by Suzanne Lacy and Leslie Labowitz. This is a photograph of a performance work that was done called In Mourning and Rage, and this is basically a piece that was done to talk about ancient public rituals. And there were a series of rape murders going on at the time in Los Angeles. And women at the time felt that not enough was being done to find the perpetrators and to help the victims. And so they basically came out in protest, draped like public mourners at ancient rituals. So that's what you're seeing there. And then on the right is artist Betty Saar has taken an image, a very stereotypical image of the African American woman, the Aunt Jemima, or the Mammy, and she has liberated her. If you look at her on the left, she's holding a broom, which would be something you would think of a mammy as holding, but she's also holding a pistol in that hand as well. And on the other side, she's got a rifle. So Betty Saar has used this piece to give Aunt Jemima the instruments of her own liberation. So art and popular culture. We're going to look at some pop art. And basically what that means is art that references back to popular culture. Andy Warhol actually is considered a pop artist because of his love of celebrities, so popular things. We're also going to look at ready-mades, assemblages, and pop art. So on the left, we have kind of a quilt painting. It's a collage as well by Miriam Shapiro. She was part of the feminist art movement. This is called Wonderland, and what Miriam Shapiro is known for doing is taking things that are considered women's work, like quilts, like needlework, and making them into works of art to uphold them and to bring them into the realm, women's work into the realm of fine art. And then quite differently on the right-hand side, this is by Marcel Duchamp. Marcel Duchamp was part of a group of artists known as the Dadas. And this was actually originally done in 1917, as you can see on the signature there on the piece. And what he did, this was really, Dada art was meant to piss off the institutions of art at the time by kind of making fun of everything. And he would take everyday objects, sign them, and call them ready-mades, because they're, well, ready-made. So what he did here is he took a urinal, turned it upside down, didn't even sign it with his own name. Instead, he signs R. Mutt in the year 1917. And I believe this was actually originally destroyed because people were so angry about it. But in any case, this is another one of those pieces where you might say, well, how can that be art? So again, ready-made are objects elevated from the commonplace to the position of art, and assemblage, like we just saw of Betty Saar's piece back here, you could say this is an assemblage because she's taken several elements and brought them together. So an assemblage is art made and assembled from found objects. And then pop art is art that utilizes the commonplace objects and visual cliches to make the viewer think twice about the symbols and objects that surround us. Not think twice. By the way, I didn't write this slide. I'm just reciting it. So yeah, I'll fix that another time. So art also meets the needs of the artist. So I'm going to talk first about the piece on the right. This is by someone who would not really normally be considered an artist necessarily. This is by a man named Matthew I. Smith. And Matthew I. Smith was actually, I don't remember when he was active, but he was actually institutionalized. And a lot of times people who are considered crazy by, conventional society find themselves creating works while they're institutionalized. And so you can see, if you look very, very closely, going all the way in the back part of this piece and up at the top, he starts very, very small, and then these things get bigger, or maybe he starts bigger at the bottom and goes up to the top, getting smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller. Why did he create it? When you're institutionalized, you may not have a lot to do. You may need some outlet. So in this case, it is meeting his needs by providing him with an outlet. On the left, we have a mural, a fresco that was created by Jose Clemente Orozco, and it's called An Epic of American Civilization, Hispano-America. And this was created for actually during the 1930s, after the Depression. Artists were out of work. In fact, many, many, many people were out of work. And so Franklin Roosevelt created the Works Project Administration to put people to work. And under the Works Project Administration, they created the Fine Arts Program, and they created a lot of amazing murals. And so this helps because it puts artists to work. It's meeting those needs, but it also is meeting another need to call attention to and express outrage at injustices against Mexican peasants. So there's a whole lot going on in that image. And Diego Rivera, who I talked about earlier, was the husband of Frida Kahlo. He was another one of the Mexican muralists. And all of their work is kind of like this, expressing outrage against the wealthy taking advantage of the less advantaged. So that concludes our first chapter. Next chapter, we will be talking about what the actual elements of art are, some of the language that goes along with that we're going to be using this semester. So I'm going to conclude this for now. As always, if you have any questions or anything, do not hesitate to contact me via email. Is probably the best way to contact me. And I hope you have a great day.